Zimmer, Ms. Gallatin, and then Dr. Ladovich.
I'm going to stand with Ms. Flores, and I do believe that there are ways that we can stand that we haven't stood yet. And before I could vote to do the damages that Ms. Flores so eloquently spoke of, I would need to know that we exhausted every possible option of shared solutions, clearly identified, that we discussed that has not been discussed here yet, but has a very important place at this table, the criminal underfunding of the IDEA mandate at the federal level that creates a dramatic multi-$100 million structural deficit in our budget. That's not addressed anywhere. State revenue options, increased revenue options, some that were spoke about here by some of our speakers, and a serious, difficult conversation that we need to have. And difficult, maybe not in a way that you would predict that I would make it difficult, a difficult conversation about declining enrollment and all the causes of it. I want to talk today in a context of also extending my sincere support of the superintendent-elect, and the staff. While I'm unable to support this budget, I want to talk about the dominant national and local narratives that we need to combat. Because if you are to listen to the Republican majority in the House, they would tell you that the stimulus dollars, not an 8-year or 9-year or 10-year war that was unfunded, the stimulus dollars are the cause of this crisis. Well, let me tell you, the stimulus dollars that came to this district saved children and families and their future and their education for 2 years. It saved children who did not cause this economic crisis and who we pledge and continue to pledge today won't be the victims of it. But if you continue to listen to the narrative from Washington and these code words like wasteful spending, and if you hear the language, the hate in the continuing resolution offered by the Republicans in Congress, there is no choice but to conclude that this is a war on poor and working families, their children, and their futures, and it is a war that is being waged against our classrooms. It is a war that we have an obligation to stand up and fight against with every tool in our arsenal. Because if we truly believe, as I've heard everybody around this table say in one way, shape, or form, that poverty does not and cannot determine outcomes, then we have to ensure that poverty and education poverty does not become an epidemic. The local narrative goes something like this: that LAUSD is dysfunctional, that we suck, that we're bloated, and that the private sector can do it better than we can. Well, I have 5,000 emails that have come in since last week from the SRLDP program, from the Magnet program, for all these programs from parents, not from politicians, from parents who believe we do, and as the evidence points, that we do a damn good job, and that they care enough to come and take days off work to come be with us to support these programs. The second part of that narrative is that this is all the fault of the public sector unions. And let me tell you, I am the first to criticize when I think our partners do things that are not in the interest of our kids. But last year, when we faced this crisis, our partners stepped up, our bargaining units stepped up, the leadership of our bargaining units stepped up in a way that no one conceived and no one imagined, and no one has given them their due for that. We would not still be standing if it weren't for that partnership. And I trust it was leadership and it was putting kids first. And I trust that if approached as a true partner again, that our labor leaders will put kids first again. Let's not be naive about this. There are vested interests who want there to be more and more and more and more stress upon this district. And I do not now and can never subscribe to a shock doctrine approach to this crisis. I can't subscribe to the idea of a perpetual crisis that eliminates public education as we know it. And that's not to say that I don't believe in transformative change, as the board president spoke about. And that's not to say that I don't believe that we have to make the really difficult decisions and have the courageous conversations about not doing the things that created that 50% graduation rate that we all bear a responsibility for, but rather to do the things like the building program, like the changes that we have begun to make that my colleagues have referenced, that will forever eradicate that injustice. I cannot knowingly and conscientiously participate in inflicting more stress upon our classrooms, both because of the advantages it will provide to those who have a vested interest in our failure, but more importantly, because of the collateral damage it will cause to children who didn't create this crisis, who didn't ask for this crisis, who we cannot let be the victims of this crisis. So even as I have to dissent, I pledge to the superintendent-elect my undying commitment and relentless pursuit of justice for our children in Washington, in Sacramento, with our bargaining units, with anyone who is willing to come to the table and help us, genuinely help us through this crisis. But I cannot, as I expressed to you in an email, any longer see this as a cliff. Because falling off of cliff or anything else is necessarily an individual and isolated act that leaves our children behind. Rather, I see this as a mountain, just as I saw last year as a mountain. And climbs, the most successful climbs, can only be done with a full team on board. They are a collective act, an interdependent act. But ultimately, climbing is a hopeful act. I have to believe in that hope today, and that belief prevents me from voting to raise class size before we have exhausted every single conceivable option not to do so.
Ms. Gallatin.